All right. So, Ben, I hate, I have a confession to make. I hate fantasy football. It's just, it, I don't know why do I keep doing this to myself? Why do I keep
Okay,
playing?
that's what I
I
was going
think
to
I've,
ask if you play.
yeah,
I
yeah.
know you have in the past. I didn't know about this season.
So I think I've been in fantasy football like as long as I've been alive. Um, I've, I remember in grade, fourth grade, elementary school, I would skip recess, or I guess I would use recess to go to the library and get the newspaper and look up the stats Monday during lunchtime
For fantasy football or for
for
just
fantasy football.
for wow. Oh my
I
gosh.
remember staying up and listening to the Monday night game on my radio on my in my bed
Yeah.
until 11 o'clock at night and writing down on the piece of paper and counting how many yards
Oh wow.
I can't even think of a running back like Edgar Bennett, how many yards he had.
Were you in a league at that time, or you were just like doing
Yeah, I
it
played with
yourself?
my
Okay.
my friends. My dad
Wow.
organized a league,
That's cool. That's
and
man.
I, you know, but
So
I
you
I
must have
hate it.
started. You probably started like right at the beginning of fantasy football then, because it's only been going. I mean, not only, but it's. I mean, probably what early 2000s, right? Is probably when it started
This
around
would have
there
been like 90, I don't know, 94.
early on. So yeah, you were probably doing some early version of it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so it is, but it isn't. It's not cool.
Yeah, right.
So when I played with my friends, like there's no money, you're in fifth, sixth grade, but just being so competitive. Like I wanted to win so bad.
Yeah.
And that was way before the internet. So, I remember kind of skewing my lineup at
Hmm.
times because somebody would count it. And so it wasn't like you get on your phone and you check, oh, how many yards does, Randy Moss have?
Hmm.
And
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
I remember one Thanksgiving, Randy Moss had like 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Cowboys, I think.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And my dad, I don't think I had set my lineup, and I was like, oh, I definitely started him. Yeah, I
Hmm.
definitely. So I can't do that anymore.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
I had the perfect lineup. I was going to win my league or be in the championship this year.
Hmm.
And I just had like a glitch, and somebody started that I didn't want to start, and then my bench was amazing, and of course it doesn't count. So I want to throw this out here. Shouldn't fantasy football just be overall points, just bench included? Because that's part of your team.
Well, so I would argue that part of the skill set of being a fantasy football owner is that you have to make those tough decisions about who to start, you know?
Right,
And so
right.
it's like, so for example, I've got Brandon Ayuk, the wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers, who has played in most of the games, but he's still missed like 3 or 4 games this year. But every time he plays, he goes off. And so I have to balance that with like playing him over some of my other wide receiver twos. And that's been like a big not a huge internal struggle for me, like actually, but like from a fantasy football perspective, I'm like, should I start him or not? And so just like that, like I think that's part of the allure to and like the skill set of like, should I start this person over this person? Um,
It is.
but I understand like there's nothing more frustrating when you leave a billion points on the bench
Right.
and you're also like, well, I don't get anything, even though I had the foresight to draft him or to pick him
Correct.
up. So it's like, how do you manage that? So yeah, I get
I
where you're
just,
coming from.
the other thing is when you play against somebody, like, I'm playing against you and somebody else is playing against somebody else, and then I have like 180 points, and somebody else wins like 96 to 87, and I lose 180 to 181. Like, it just shouldn't be that way. It should just be most points. Just that's it. Just most
So you
points.
would like a tiered system, like everybody plays everybody in the week, and then whoever.
Like, you're just trying to. So you have 12 teams. The
Mhm.
top six get a win.
Okay, gotcha. I see.
Like, doesn't
I
that
see
make
what you're
more
saying.
sense? I
I
don't
see.
know.
I
I
mean,
just
Yeah, I know what you're
I would
saying.
still lose this week regardless, but
Gotcha.
still.
No, I 100% know what you're saying because like when you scroll through, let's say like you were saying, you lose 150 to 160, and then there are like three other games, and the winners of those games only scored like 100 points. Part
Hmm.
of you is like, come on, man. Like,
Yeah.
it just depends on the matchup. So, yeah, I get where you come from. There's also like that opens the Pandora's box of like that lack of defensive structure in fantasy.
Sure.
Like, it's obviously all, the only thing you can do um, is to play offense in fantasy. I mean, like,
Right.
obviously, you're still playing a defensive team, or some leagues
Like
have
a unit. Yeah.
yeah, or some leagues have like IDPs, like individual defensive players, but still
Right.
the only way to win is to score points, and so you can't play defense. So it is a little like not like football in that aspect, so which can
Right.
be frustrating.
Okay. And then my other complaint, I've got a lot of complaints here.
Hmm.
The people that check out like week 6, so
Yeah,
they're in your league and they haven't updated their lineup in 9 weeks.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
you're trying to make trades with these people because they have like, I keep thinking of him, but I guess he was so good at fantasy. I keep thinking of Randy Moss. Like Randy Moss
uh,
on your bench, 2007,
yeah,
and he's scoring 50,
yeah.
and he's on the bench of this guy who stopped playing at week 5. Like, you
Right,
should just
right.
get like eliminated. I don't know. We have to come up with some kind of system to get rid of these teams.
Yeah, I mean, I so there are a few different like scenarios that I've heard of, like a not being reinvited back to the league the next time,
Right.
or like I think there's been like people have thrown around the idea of like in because like people some leagues you have to have a fee, like entry fee, and so doubling the
Right.
entry fee if you check out. But like
Oh, I like
I
that.
agree, yeah, and so it like kind of deters that. But like also like that I guess the biggest thing is like, yes, it's probably an easy win unless you're that one guy that still happens to like have a terrible week and lose to that player that checked out week 6. Or the more frustrating part to me is like when you need somebody to lose
Right.
to like make the playoffs or something, and that person is playing the guy who checked out in week
Right.
6, and so it's
Exactly.
like like come on guys, let's just and they have a great bench, so they have Randy Moss on the bench, and you're just like, come on, let's be diligent. You got to play. That's why one of the things I like to do, like before I enter a league, is to know how much bandwidth am I going to have the next like 5 months to devote to fantasy football, and how many leagues do I want to take on, and what intensity of the league. So hopefully most people do that, but I know every now and then you'll get that person that doesn't.
Yeah. All right. I'm trying to think of what else I got here. Um, so this is more philosophical.
Great, love it.
Does fantasy football, has it changed like the and I'm talking about the NFL mostly. I know there's other
Mhm.
fantasy leagues, but NFL is the most popular. So fantasy football, has it like affected the NFL's like fandom? Like all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I can't stand the Cowboys, but Zeke's on my fantasy team.
Yeah.
Has it
Well,
like wrecked somewhat of fandom?
I 100%. I
Really?
I don't
Okay.
I don't know if I would say it wrecked it. More so, it just altered it. So I was kind of a like in high school, I was sort of like a football purist, and because of that, for like I don't know, maybe eighth grade, ninth grade, and 10th grade, or for a few years, I specifically remembering I didn't want to play fantasy football because I didn't want it to ruin my view of like who I was cheering for. So
Right.
like if the Saints and Chargers were playing, I wanted to root for the Chargers because they're my favorite team. But then what if I had a player on the Saints? Like that it would feel like, kind of strange and not pure. And then
Hmm.
eventually I was like, whatever, it's just for fun. And then I ended up playing fantasy football. But I would definitely agree that and I would love to see, and obviously it would be compounded with other things, but I would love to see like revenue streams of the NFL as a whole before fantasy football and after fantasy football. Because
Okay.
like you said, like I really think fantasy football has upped the value of the NFL, and probably specifically like a good amount of the franchises that are like the bottom feeders. Um,
Right.
because like if you were watching the Jaguars play the Jets, no one really wants to watch that game
Right.
this year. But if you have like a James Robinson or
Yep.
like a Sam Darnold or someone on your fantasy team, then that game becomes a lot more exciting. So it increases, people are still going to watch the Patriots and the Packers and those high level teams that play well every year. But I think it really, really helps the franchises that struggle over the past, couple decades, and probably increases their viewership a whole lot. But it definitely, has. And one thing that like I've seen it do, like, and I think this probably is more of a pointed answer to your question, is like I've seen people who like absolutely hate a different team end up rooting for some of the players on that team because they're on their fantasy team, right? And so like I heard of a strategy once about a guy who liked the Redskins a lot, and so he picked a lot of Cowboys for his fantasy team, and the reasoning was because if the Cowboys do well, his fantasy team does well, but if the Cowboys do poorly, then they're the Cowboys, and he hates them. So great. So it is like a very strange dynamic, because all of a sudden you have people rooting for people that they wouldn't normally root for. And I think as a NFL fan, it definitely changes the game and the landscape of who you root for.
Yeah, it really is something. So I've come to this decision. Like I said, I hate fantasy football. I'm done with it. It's been too long. It's been since
Okay.
fourth grade.
All right. You've heard
I've,
it here. What is it? December
yeah, I'm
22nd.
done.
Andrew Frazier's done with
I've won
fantasy
many
football.
championships. I've have a couple of traveling trophies that I need to send back to California that I
Mm-hmm.
just don't do anything with. Um, and I think I'm done. And one thing I am more interested in, because I think, talking about football purists, I think like just the bet of the line on a game,
Mm-hmm.
like Packers +8. That just feels so pure. You're betting a whole game. You're betting on a
Mm-hmm.
whole team. Obviously, weird things can happen, 2-point conversions, people not going for the extra point at the end of the game could screw something up, a safety. I just feel like that's more pure, and I think that's my route, because I
Mm-hmm.
still have to gamble in some way.
Okay. Gotcha. So you gotta do the team as a whole rather than the
I just
players.
think it's more. It just makes more sense.
I definitely agree that the volatility in fantasy football can be like super frustrating, right? Like
Yeah,
the amount of players who have a fantastic, 3 weeks in a row and then just have a terrible, week all of a sudden. And it's like that lack of predictability is super frustrating. So question for you, are you legitimately like not going to play next season? Is that kind of your take right now?
man. I think I at least need a break. I
So,
have to get out.
so it's
It's
not
too
from,
frustrating.
it sounds like it's not like because like, obviously some people are frustrated when they don't win, but it sounds like you've won a good amount in fantasy like over the years.
Well, I think that's frustrating. Like, I know I'm the best player.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So I should win. Like, my bench will blow
I
you out
see.
of the
I see.
water.
Gotcha.
My
Gotcha.
ability to pick defenses and listen to this and that. But there's still things that surprise me, like the Rams defense against the Jets the past week
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
scored 2 points,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and the
Right.
Jets won 23-20, and they
Yeah.
were what, 0-13, 0-12.
Yeah. They hadn't won a game before that. So,
So
um,
there's still going to be stuff that it's unpredictable, but
yeah.
I'm just like, no, I've mastered this. I've been doing this forever.
You know what you could do to if there's any potential to sway your decision is you could get into a league with like a little bit more advanced players,
Yeah, I think
um,
you're right.
which it obviously depends on who and if you want to play with people but my a little anecdote, my brother-in-law Kyle, he's the commissioner for my former fantasy football league,
Uh,
and I was in that league for 3 years, I think, and I finished right about the middle of the pack.
mhm.
I was seventh, sixth, fifth. So I was projected in like 2024 to win um, the whole thing, but uh, they were well. There's a couple of reasons why I didn't rejoin this year, but one of the main reasons is because the like people in that league, like fantasy football is like one of their legitimate hobbies, you
Mhm.
know? And it's like there's people in that league that make algorithms, that make like
Yeah.
that write code, and that like, you know how like read so many different uh websites and stuff like that. And like it has to be your hobby for that league. And if it's not, then you're kind of behind the eight ball. And I think for me, it was like a hobby of mine, but I was much more invested in it than I felt like I really wanted to be, I guess, the past few
Yeah.
years. And so I didn't want to continue doing that because I knew I wasn't going to be able to keep up. And I knew I would be one of those guys who like wasn't investing as much time and effort as the other guys in the league were. And I didn't want to be that guy in the league, you know? But all that to say, like you could be worth your time looking into a league with, you know, better players as well.
Right. I mean, maybe. I just think I'm not. It's just, I think I'm just not having fun with it. I just want to watch a game
Yeah.
and be like, okay, I need, I need this team to win by 3. I need the
Mm-hmm.
Bills to stay within 8 points of the
Gotcha.
Patriots in a normal season, not this
Right. All
season.
right.
Josh
Mm-hmm.
Allen has been unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I just think that is more fun to me.
Yeah.
The whole like, oh, I have you know, I've got or not Mayweather.
Baker.
Baker.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Mayfield.
Mayfield.
Yeah.
I've got Mayfield this week. He's going to score 22, but nobody has picked him up the entire seain.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
going to pick him up in my playoff game because of some matchup.
Mm-hmm.
He's, it just feels, I don't know, it's just not fun.
Yeah.
I want to enjoy like good football. Who won this game? How did the defense play? How did they coach? How did they scheme? Like
Mm-hmm.
the Panthers had a great game plan for Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, and they did nothing. And that probably cost, me and many others like a playoff in fantasy,
Yeah. Yeah.
but the Packers still won the game by 8.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah. No,
I
I
don't know.
definitely get that. I mean, it does, like we say, it does definitely like tarnish your viewing experience, or it mixes it, like it modifies it, and you're
Right.
looking at different things, like you're watching like the team's third string wide receiver rather than
Yes.
like the ball
Well,
game itself. So
so
I get that.
Miami didn't have a running back. Like a bunch of people had been hurt. So there's a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of waiver wires for like a bunch of running backs for Miami that nobody's ever heard of, but they're going to get so many snaps.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think the same thing happened for Washington. One
Mm-hmm.
of their running backs scored like 26 points, and he was on my bench, of course, because I didn't know his name.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
I started Chris Carson instead of him,
Uh-huh.
and it's just frustrating. I'm
Yeah,
done
I
with
mean,
it.
it's one of those things that like you have to be on the ball with it every week, and like, you know, if you miss like if you miss like, oh, so and so's on a snap count or something like that, you miss that one thing about the player, then it's like that could determine whether or not you won that week. So there's
Yep.
also like a lot of little things, but also, you know, I think I've told you about this, but this is kind of, I think, probably an interesting thing for the viewers or the listeners to hear about was, I told you about how we made a golf fantasy football league, right? Did I ever tell you about
No, I
that?
don't think so.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad I'm not retelling you the story, but so it was like, I forgot what the driving factor was behind this, but one day, you know, I was just like hanging out with my friends, and we were thinking like, wouldn't it be great to like, instead of projecting who is going to be the best fantasy football players that week, project who is going to be the worst fantasy football players that
I
week, and like
like
who
that.
would, yeah. And so it was, we had about 10 people in the league, I think. But eventually the league, it fizzled out. But anyways, the setup was, I think, actually really well designed. Essentially, we had to have a lot of cutoffs. And so for our draft, we said, you have to draft one of the top 32 quarterbacks in the NFL. So you couldn't draft like someone
Sure.
who was just complete garbage. You had to
Right.
draft a starting quarterback. And then you had to decide whether or not you wanted to play Peyton Manning or Tom Brady that week, and by projecting which one was going to play worse.
Right.
And so we had a whole lot of like regulations on it. Like if you ended up playing somebody who was injured, you would get a penalty and stuff like that. So it was just like a lot of thinking through that process, but it was a lot of fun.
I like that
Because it was like,
idea.
instead of cheering for your quarterback to score a touchdown, you were cheering for him to throw an interception. So it was difficult. I was the commissioner, and because it's not set up for this, it's like super manualized and not automatic at all. So it was difficult as a commissioner to do that. But, I think if ESPN made that an option, it would be a lot of fun for people to play.
Well, I like that. That's a good creative idea. I actually have to run here, but I like this idea.
Yeah.
Maybe next year I would play that. I would play
Okay.
that
Sounds
next
good.
year.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
get that
Circle
going,
back.
let me know.
Okay. I will.
Cool. Well, thanks for listening, Ben.
Yeah.
You're good. You're a good therapist. So
Good. Fantasy football therapist.
yes. Cool. All right, I'm gonna stop.